Here we go again, folks. It's another slideshow of another trip that I've taken. The first slideshow that I put up was received relatively well, so it's encouraged me to carry on. You may never get me stopped now. This trip is to Paris again, and some day trips out of Paris. Chartres to see the Cathedral, and the Loire Valley to see some of the chateaus in the Loire Valley. And then after Paris, we moved on to Prague in the Czech Republic for close to a week, I guess, before we came back home. The trip was because a friend of mine was with me on a small group, not a smaller group than this. This is just the two of us, plus we picked up Prue and her husband, Yvonne, after we arrived in Paris. But Pat was with me on a trip with a small group, and we went to Paris, and then we went to the Channel Islands, and back home. I went to London. I guess everybody else went back home. I went to London for a while. Pat had never been to Paris before, and our stay in Paris was quite short, just 2 or 3 days, so I asked her if she would like to go again, and she said yes, so we planned this trip. We rented apartments in both Paris and in Prague. The one in Paris was a nice little apartment, but wait till you see the one in Prague. I don't think I have any pictures of the one in Paris. There was nothing wrong with it. It was just a nice, small little apartment. And starting off these pictures once again is Place des Vosges. I have to go there every time. Because I guess I usually have somebody with me that hasn't been there, but I just love Place des Vosges. It's that sort of 17th century, I think, enclosed square. In the middle of the square is a park and fountains, and there's an arcade covered over arcade. You can see the arches there, but you can walk all the way around the square, and there are interesting little shops and restaurants and whatever. And Victor Hugo has a house there as well, so you can go in and Victor Hugo is no longer there, but the house is still there, and you can have a tour of that, which we did on one of these trips. I don't think it was this one. That's just a close-up of one of the fountains and people enjoying the park. I'm not going to make you go through all my other pictures of Place des Vosges again, just these two. The scale of the buildings in the older part of Paris, there is a new part that has skyscrapers and everything, but this is about the height of most buildings in the older part of Paris. I think Haussmann is the name of the architect who is responsible for the layout and design of Paris, again, I think done in the 17th century. What I find interesting about this building is the balconies. On the flat, narrow side there, the balconies that you can see are what they call a Paris balcony. There's no balcony that you can stand on. You can open the door from inside, and then there is the wrought iron railing or whatever so that you won't fall out into the street. And then along the long side of the building, you can see what we would refer to more as a balcony, one that you could actually step out on. I had never been to the Bagatelle Gardens before, something that I had wanted to see, mainly because, well, the gardens are nice. There's lots of nice flowers. It's a large park-like area, but there are peacocks everywhere. I've always wanted to go see it. So this trip, Prue took us out and showed us the gardens at Bagatelle. And I wasn't disappointed at all. Every time you turned around, there was another peacock. After we got out of there, I got thinking about it. I don't think I saw a peahen at all, the females. I'm sure they've got them somewhere, but these guys were on full display, even if there weren't any lady peahens for them to be showing off for. Well, as I said, it was a very beautiful park, so I'll let some of these slides go by and show you the spring flowers. I don't think I mentioned the trip was once again an April trip, so spring blooms were in full force. I think this might have been the building that had the small restaurant in it. Maybe not. I'm not certain anymore. And they had a demonstration fruit and vegetable garden, which of course interested me more than the flowers. An espaliered apple or pear tree? Apple, I think. Surprised that the vegetables were so far along, considering it was only April. That's cardoon. I think it's a relative of the artichoke family, but you eat the foliage or the stems. That's sorrel. Back into some flowers, forget-me-nots in bloom. Beautiful flower beds everywhere. One of our day trips out of Paris, as I said, was to Chartres to see the famous medieval cathedral. I had never been there before myself, so I really enjoyed the trip. Took a fast train out of Gare Montparnasse, the Montparnasse train station. Less than an hour, I think, and you're there in the city. A beautiful cathedral, and did something that I have never done before. Had an organized tour. A man who has written books on the cathedral and does small tours, 5 or 6 people in the tour, only about an hour or so, but it was very informative. That is a clock. I think if I studied it for a week or so, I might be able to figure out what time it is. Probably tells you a lot more than just the time, I guess. But and flying buttresses lets you know that it's a Gothic cathedral. And that's my kind of maze. No way you could get lost in that thing, anyway. Inside the cathedral, of course, because of the flying buttresses, there can be lots of glass in the walls. Very, very beautiful. There are 2 of these. They're like lecterns or pulpits or whatever. Very strange, I thought, with the one an animal with horns. I don't know what that thing is, but I didn't expect to find them in a cathedral. And we finished the day before we went back to Paris at a lovely tea room where we had a fine meal, and it was decorated, of course, a tea room decorated with teapots. Well, the reason I've been mentioning the name of the train station in Paris that we used to go to Chartres and obviously return to the same station, Montparnasse, is because it is next to Tour Montparnasse Tower. And from the top of the tower, you have this spectacular view. When the tower was built, and I say tower, it's a building, an office building, rectangular in shape and very tall. When it was built, I think in the 1960s maybe, it was the tallest building in Europe. And I finally got to go to the top. I've seen the building many times, but you pay a little something to go up to the observation deck. And spectacular views of Paris. Behind the Eiffel Tower is what the modern business section of Paris with skyscraper type office buildings. I only went there once, a number of years ago now. Um, I mean, every city, a modern city, needs its modern business center, but it isn't the part of Paris that interests me, I guess. I prefer the older sections. Pat and I are both members of the Pathfinders walking group over here in Maine and New Brunswick. We meet every Sunday afternoon, or most Sunday afternoons, for a walk. Prue is a member of the Ile-de-France walking group in Paris. Ile-de-France is the area of Paris, and all the surrounding communities referred to as the island of France, Ile-de-France. And we asked if it would be possible to take a walk with them, and they arranged it so that we could meet up. And what we walked is called the Promenade Plante. At one time, it was a train line, and I think an above-ground section of the metro, but it was no longer being used. So instead of tearing it down, they planted it as a park, and I don't know, I would say it's at least a kilometer long. We walked some of the city as well, but very beautiful area, and you get to see some of the very unique buildings along the way as well. And as I say, it was early April, and everything was in glorious flower, so I really enjoyed the Promenade Plante. How was that for a building? The train evidently went straight through that building when it was a train line. Little places here and there where you could sit and have a lunch or whatever, and park benches. Very beautiful area. And I have to take pictures of the strange plants that I see, of course. No idea what that was. I've seen these in many parks in Paris. I've never seen them over here anywhere. Perhaps some big cities do have them. They're like stations that are available for any of the animals that need something to build their nests with. You can see logs that are drilled there for things like mason bees, leafcutter bees, whatever. I think they're wonderful ideas. I presume it works quite well. They certainly have enough of them in various parks that I've attended. Playing around with an app that I have that you can turn your photo into a cartoon. That's Prue and Pat I colored in there. And this very interesting Art Deco building that had the sculptures along the roof line. Well, after leaving the Ile-de-France walking group, we went to the Agave Plant, which is an botanical garden, and a medicinal botanical garden is what it started out as in like the 17th century. Right now it's just a beautiful parkland, and still a lot of the original plantings are there or replanted to look like the original plantings. Pat is an avid gardener and a really knowledgeable amateur herbalist, so this was a really big treat for Pat to see. Well, after all that walking in the fresh air, we were hungry. We went to the Paris Mosque, the Mosquée de Paris, and they have a lovely little restaurant there where you eat in an outside courtyard. At least it was in good weather, you eat in an outside courtyard. And I had a wonderful vegetarian couscous. Next day, I took Pat to one of my favorite shopping areas. They're called passageways. They're sort of like a 19th century version of our malls today. There's three or four of them, all within easy walking distance of each other. And I love to shop in the antique shops there. This was not an antique shop. How's that for a window display? Our last day in France before flying to Prague, we took a high-speed train to the Loire Valley where we rented a car, and Prue played chauffeur once again. And we went and saw three of the chateaus. The first one here is Chenonceau. A lot of these photographs are quite self-explanatory, so I won't elaborate on what they are. Beautiful gardens at Chenonceau. And the warm fire from the fireplace was a welcome thing. It was a cold, showery sort of a spring day. And every home, of course, should have its own chapel. The beautiful tapestries on the walls are what interested me. This long gallery was a hospital in the First World War. How's that for a kitchen range? You get that fired up full of coal. I imagine that was a pleasant experience on a hot August day. The beds are nice, but I keep looking at the tapestries. And that's just a painting of Chenonceau. The next one was Villandry. You can see some fencing there, under restoration parts of it. And I think this is the one where the family still lives in the chateau. There were parts of it that were not accessible to the public. More lovely tapestries. I like it when they have tables set up so it looks like you could sit down and join them for lunch. Billiards, anybody? Just an interesting piece of furniture in a hallway. There are many more chateaus, but the last one that we visited was Rideau. I like the ones that have water around them for some reason. This one wasn't completely surrounded by water, but had a river running past it. And beautiful spring flowers everywhere. Lots of primroses. Another fireplace with the fire going in it. And a lovely setting for dinner. Here the kitchen had a built-in bread oven. I don't think those loaves were actually baked in that oven, but it was a nice display anyway. More beautiful copper pots. You would need servants just to keep the copper shined. This is a ceiling. It's always important to look up when you're in one of these places. Beautiful formal gardens. Very well maintained. There's a lot of clipping to keep that looking like it does. A view from inside looking out one of the windows. And my last photo is me playing with that app that turns them into cartoons again. Just left some colored areas there. The next day we flew on to Prague. Prue and Pat and I couldn't convince Yvonne to go with us, understandably, I guess. Yvonne was born in Prague. He's Czech by birth and is now a French citizen. At the beginning of World War II, his family fled Czechoslovakia for France. After the Second World War, the communists took over in Czechoslovakia. His home there was confiscated by the communist government and given to somebody else. After the communist era, his brother attempted to get the home back, and even though the government was no longer communist, they would not return the home to its original owners, so it does not sit well with Yvonne, and he will not go to Prague or to the Czech Republic. As I said at the beginning of this slideshow, I was so impressed with our apartment in Prague. It was in the old section of the city, beautiful city. I really like Prague. I had never been there before, but I would certainly like to go back again. This is the building. Ground floor, which I will show you quite a bit. I only have a couple of photographs of the ground floor, but the ground floor is a wonderful bake shop. And our apartment was basically the attic. That cupola on top, our apartment is directly below that, and all of the supporting structures and beams for that cupola were in our living room. A very interesting apartment. And all we had for windows, of course, was those little sort of eyebrow windows that you see up there. But the apartment was just fabulous. Let's have a look inside. And this is the support structure that holds up that cupola and made the apartment such an interesting place. You can see the dining table there. Behind some of those posts is one of the sort of sitting areas. There were several. I don't know the square footage of the apartment, but it was large. It would have been large by North American standards and very large by European standards. I would say well in advance of 1,000 square feet, perhaps 1,200 square feet. There were 3 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, a half bath laundry room. It's just an incredible apartment. I got caught taking more photographs, so Pat and Prue put on some kind of a performance. I think this might have been the window in my bedroom. Not sure, but all the windows were sort of little strange shaped things, because we are in the attic after all. And fortunately, there was an elevator that went up almost to the top, so that we only had one small flight of stairs to walk up. And this is the nighttime view from my bedroom window. Another building across the street with one of those cupolas, and behind it is the castle on the hillside, all lit up at night. A couple of shots of the bakery slash coffee shop that was on the ground floor. It'd be a dangerous building for me to live in all the time. I went down every morning and brought our breakfast back up. My favorite, I think, was the croissant aux amandes, the French almond croissant. I just love the things. Very good. These were as good as any I ever had in Paris. I look at some of the interesting buildings that were in the neighborhood where our apartment was. Lots of people around. We were there a week or two before Easter, and they were having the Easter markets, which I'll show you more of in a bit. Lots of very interesting buildings. I don't know what this is called. It reminds me of like Wedgwood pottery. I really like the facades, but I've never seen them anywhere else. We walked across the city to go see Prague Castle and the Cathedral, and on the way you cross across one of the famous landmarks of Prague, the Charles Bridge. It's now just a pedestrian bridge. I think it dates from the Middle Ages at some point. Lined on both sides with interesting sculptures. Always busy with tourists, like me. This particular brass plaque, you rub it for good luck, which keeps it nice and shiny. Thousands of people rubbing it every day. And no, I didn't do it. I don't stand in line to rub plaques. Distant look at our destination, the cathedral and palace. I say palace because to me it looked more like a palace than what I would think of as a castle. Not sure the era that it dates from, but I think of castles as being stone with turrets and all that sort of thing. It was very much like a palace to me. Moved on to St. Vitus Cathedral, beautiful glass. I believe St. Vitus is the same saint that St. Vitus dance is named after, which I believe is an early name for Parkinson's disease. Uncontrollable tremors, anyway. It was called St. Vitus dance. Interesting part of the cathedral for me was the treasury, or the small museum. Many interesting items. Those are all reliquaries with different relics of saints in them. Those are called a remonstrance. More reliquaries, I think, but I'm not really certain. I think it was meant to be a cover of a book, the Bible, more than likely. What was in that one, I don't know. Lots of gold in the place, anyway. Bishop's staff. Chalices and two more of the remonstrances. Two of the things that the Czech Republic is known for are garnets, semi-precious stone, and there were jewelry stores everywhere offering different things with garnets in various price ranges. And the other thing is ambergris. Both garnets and amber are something that are, well, not easy, but something that are frequently faked. Some of the prices were quite low on these items, which would make you think that they weren't real, but then the higher end shops had some beautiful things that were obviously real. As I said earlier, we were there in time to see the Easter markets. Lots of traditional food available everywhere. I don't know what these are called because I don't speak Czech, but it's a type of pastry that is wrapped around a metal cylinder and then they slowly rotate and cook over fire or over hot coals or whatever. And once they have cooled a bit, they take them off the cylinder and put sugar and cinnamon on them. All I can tell you is they're delicious. I have no idea what you call it. This is the same thing, only several of them on one each cylinder, and the guy there had to hand turn his. I love these wherever I find them. They're actually not statues, those are people wearing heavy gold makeup in this case, and they stand perfectly still. You give them a coin or two in that box, and as you can see, the guy gave me the thumb up for giving him a coin, but I can't resist taking pictures of them. I guess these two fellows, I don't know if they were doing the same thing or not, but they had paused for lunch. Most of the Easter market was in the same location as our apartment, just a few minutes walk down the street. And another part of it was over in Wenceslas Square, which I'll show you in a few minutes. Blacksmith demonstrating his trade. And I actually did purchase Easter eggs. Beautiful hand-done Easter eggs. I can't remember how many I bought. I bought enough that I gave them to my great-nieces and nephews for Easter when I got back home. From that particular lady is who I bought them from. And I didn't break any on the way home. Amazed me. These guys were at the Easter market too. And this is over on Wenceslas Square. I'll show you some more of the square later on, or just a minute or so here. But this is more of the Easter market. Well, Wenceslas Square, of course, is named after good King Wenceslas, the same guy from the Christmas Carol. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, and all the snow lay round about, firm and deep and even. Feast of Stephen, I think, is the day after Christmas, but the square is now more famous in our lifetime, anyway, for the end of the communist era. When the people of Czechoslovakia had had enough of the communism, they filled Wenceslas Square with thousands of people every night for weeks on end, until finally the communist government fell. We got tickets to a concert that was given in an old synagogue, no longer used as a synagogue. It's now a museum and a concert space. I presume the congregation wasn't large enough to maintain it anymore. They've moved on to another facility somewhere. It's a beautiful building. And a not very good photograph of the lady who sang, part of the orchestra. I think this was our last night in Prague. Well, that's the end of this trip. We returned home. I hope you enjoyed the little slideshow if you're still awake at the end here. This is just the last photograph, but it's one of those bridges. I found them now, I think, in 3 different countries. Eternal love is what it's supposed to mean. Young lovers go to the bridge and put a padlock on the bridge, and then they throw the key in the river. So that's unbroken love, locked in love forever, I guess. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little slideshow.